Hi there. My name is Jeff Pamerlo, and I'm a senior security engineer at Open Security. Information security is a profession for career learners. We love learning about the newest techniques, the latest mitigations and bypasses, and are generally just curious people. To facilitate this, I've decided that this year I'm going to read more so that you don't have to. With that in mind, we're excited to announce our new book review series. So please, sit back, relax, and join me for episode 1, Red Team, Development and Operations. It seems these days that everyone wants a red team. But if you ask 4 different InfoSec professionals what exactly is a red team, you might wind up with 5 different answers. Red Team, Development and Operations by Joe Vest and James Tubberville seeks to provide an answer to this question and many others. The book is a foundational piece of literature which seeks to answer the what, why, and how of red teaming. Its contents are valuable not just for those performing or organizing red teams, but for anybody who's just curious and wants to learn more about what they can expect to get out of performing red team operations. While the book is a red team book, it's hard to discuss red teaming without also talking about vulnerability assessments and penetration tests, since these types of assessments are surprisingly as misunderstood as red teaming is. While this is a minor section of the book, covered in roughly the first 40 pages or so, as someone who performs these services professionally, I think it's important to define and discuss what each is and why an organization might perform them. With this in mind, Joe and James do an excellent job of distinguishing and explaining why you might want one versus the other. There are a number of different ways to compare these types of services, why we perform them, and what organizations can seek to achieve from them. In this review, we're going to keep things high level, but we'll have a more in-depth conversation coming out a little bit later for anybody who's interested in diving into that a bit more. Joe and James present several different ways to think about these types of engagements, but the most succinct explanation, I think, comes from their use of the NIST cybersecurity framework, in particular, the IPDRR model. For those not familiar, IPDRR stands for Identify, Protect, Detect, Respond, and Recover, and are meant to reference the 5 distinct phases that any organization has to go through during and after an attack. When we evaluate these assessment types against this model, we can see that a vulnerability assessment helps an organization to see how well it can identify and protect against attacks. A penetration test helps an organization to see how well it can identify, protect, and detect attacks, while a red team helps an organization to exercise across the entire model to see how well they can identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover from a representative attack. This quick breakdown is incredibly valuable in helping organizations to determine what kinds of activities they should perform based off of what portion of the IPDRR model they want to assess. This also leads into the best definition of red teaming that I think I've ever seen. According to the authors, red teaming is the process of using tactics, techniques, and procedures to emulate a real-world threat with the goals of training and measuring the effectiveness of the people, processes, and technology used to defend an environment. With that level setting complete, Joe and James get to the meat of the book. If we know that an organization is ready for red teaming, what does that look like? What members compose a team? How do you plan and scope for an engagement? What does execution look like? And perhaps most importantly, when an engagement is complete, what immediate and long-term outcomes are to be expected? When it comes to engagement planning, the focus on threat emulation and the prerequisite research required is great. Joe and James provide concrete examples of building out threat profiles matched up to engagement goals, and include additional exercises to allow the reader to continue to practice and grow this skill. The authors also do a wonderful job of highlighting the complexity of red team operations. Unlike a traditional vulnerability assessment or penetration test, where defenders aren't involved, red team engagements will most likely at some point generate alerts tipping off the blue team to red team actions. Because of this, there has to be some level of coordination between red and blue. The book covers how to facilitate this communication and how to plan for other contingencies that might arise during operations. In discussing engagement execution, The authors do an excellent job of not only addressing the fun and sexy elements of operations, exploitation, code execution, and establishing command and control, but surprisingly, they take some of the more boring components of red teaming, things like proper logging processes and developing good tradecraft, and manage to make that content equally engaging as well. As an example of this, imagine that you're starting out a brand new internal red team with limited resources. In an effort to just immediately start performing operations, you might not give formal thought to the details and format and storage mechanisms for logs generated by you or your tools. Without conscious effort, logging will be inconsistent and may not contain all the information necessary to provide maximum value at the end of operations. Furthermore, as additional team members get brought on, this lack of formal logging policies and requirements means that inconsistencies between operators may become problematic. The authors do a great job of not only highlighting this type of issue, but also recommending some best practices from their real-world experience. Red Team, Development and Operations, ends with a discussion on engagement, culmination, and reporting. Here too, the authors provide some great insight into these processes that less mature teams may be unaware of. The call-out of both executive and technical outbriefs is something that many organizations may be missing, but it provides immediate value. I was happily surprised to see the authors address dealing with hostile counterparts. An issue in some less mature organizations is that red team operations can be viewed as adversarial when really they aren't. The red team exists solely to make the blue team better. Despite this, sometimes the red team can still deal with what Joe and James call negative organizational feedback. But in this book, they provide a method to de-escalate these hostilities. For reporting, the book proposes several models and frameworks that a red team can use and continues to stress the importance of narrative behind the attack, calling back on our emulation of a real threat to help the organization grow. Overall, Red Team, Development and Operations is a great book and should definitely be read by anyone getting into red teaming. But I honestly also believe that it has a lot of good content for anybody in any sort of security role. The way of approaching problems and the mindset that is required for successful red team operators provides one more perspective that we can all add to our toolboxes. If you have $20 and a few hours to spare, I highly recommend this book. Even for seasoned operators, it can contain some nuggets of wisdom, as sometimes we get so involved in our operations that we can lose sight of the bigger picture.